Okay, let me go ahead and unmute myself. Okay, so, oh, and the music's a little loud. Hang on, let me turn it down just a tad bit. Okay, that should be good. Okay, and welcome everybody to Friday Nights with Film Nerd. What number is this? 56, I think. And yeah, holy shit, I can't believe it's been so long. And also, real quick, while we were in standby, I actually got a donation from Bodacious CNO for $3.50. Thanks, you, buddy. Saying Happy Tree Fitty. Yes. For those of you who aren't aware, I recently hit a bit of a milestone. I hit 350 subscribers, which, yeah, is not very much, but hey, I mean, it's something at least. I'm a little closer to 500. I don't know how soon that'll be. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And if my guest will go ahead and unmute herself, we can get started. That's your cue.
That's a big if.
Yeah, I know exactly. If I actually get off my ass and start making more content, then maybe I'll hit 500 subs.
I know you can do it, Filmy.
Do you have to call me that?
I'll
fucking
always be one of them.
Okay, well, before I keel over with the cringe, Mimi, what the hell are we talking about tonight?
We are talking about live-action animation hybrid movies.
Oh.
And technically, a lot of movies that come out in the 21st century are live-action animation hybrids, right? Because everything's got CG in it. But we're specifically thinking of movies where you have interaction between cartoon characters and real-life people.
Yeah, no, I get... Yeah, that's exactly what we're hinting at. Because like you said before, there a lot of movies, like, you could almost consider them live-action cartoons, given how prevalent CGI is these days. But what we're specifically talking about is movies that have both animated characters and live-action characters, and they're, like, intermingling with one another.
And where the animated characters are not, like, hyper-realistic CG, where, you know, they're clearly cartoons.
Yeah, I mean, one of them will kind of fall into that, but we can get to it in a little bit. And Cash Wisconsinite, I see you in the chat. No, this is not the Fred review. Maybe someday I'll do it, but that's not what this is. And Sparky in the chat just said, "All right, time's up. Let's do this." Leroy Jenkins. Thank you. Very 2000s of you. Anyway, so I guess the first one we'll talk about is probably the most obvious one is, if I can pull it up, 1988's Who Framed Roger Rabbit from director Robert Zemeckis. I don't know if there's really anything more that we can say about it that hasn't already been said, other than just it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, here's the thing. A lot of movies in this category, a lot of the ones we're going to talk about, are not good movies so much as they are interesting movies.
Mm-hmm.
This one is legitimately good, though. It's a very tightly made movie, and I guess there are a few things I can say about it. Like, one thing is this movie kind of started the whole subgenre, the whole micro genre of movies that we've kind of seen abused in recent years of, we're going to take a bunch of characters from different IPs and just have them coexist in a single world and have them make cameos throughout the movie.
Yeah.
It is the first movie I know of that really did that before. I mean, it was blown out of proportion by films like Ready Player One or like Space Jam 2.
Ugh, God, don't remind me of Space Jam 2. I try to forget that movie even existed. But no, yeah, with Roger Rabbit, I mean, for one, this movie, I'm sure for a lot of people from our generation, it scared the hell out of me. Like, when Judge Doom tests the dip on a shoe, and then later in the movie when Judge Doom reveals he's a toon, and then, you know, he, like, reveals he was also the one that killed Eddie's brother, and his voice gets, like, really high-pitched, and then his eyes jut out into daggers. Like, this movie was pretty intense for a kid.
Yeah, it was. And the funny thing is, you say of our generation, this movie isn't really of my generation. It's slightly before my time, but
Yeah.
I did eventually watch it, and I do think a lot of aspects of it live up to how much it is hyped up. I mean, it's it's not even like it's not even that there's anything that like original or brilliant about like the story or characters. It's just all these elements coming together, and the fact that, how do I put this? Having these cartoon characters from different studios together in the same thing was a huge deal at the time. Like,
Hmm.
you wouldn't expect to see that. It was like Marvel crossing over with DC, which also happened. Uh,
Yeah.
I think during the same era, to see like Daffy Duck and Donald Duck, for example, together in a scene. So it had all that, but it had all that in addition to being a solid movie,
Yeah.
which I think is why people like it so much. In
Yeah.
addition to not having a lot of flaws.
Yeah, because at its heart, the movie is basically a film noir. Like, it's a detective story, which is, I mean, obviously that's boiling it down to its most basic form, but that really is what it is. It's just, a detective story that happens to involve cartoon characters, and yeah, I do agree with you about the whole crossing over thing. Like, I mean, when I say of my generation, like, I was like -3 when this movie came out. But I do remember watching this as a kid and being pretty terrified by it. But no, yeah, just the idea of
Yeah,
like
I get that.
just the idea of like Mickey
Oh,
Mouse.
it has that. It does have those moments to it, even though, I mean, it's not a very serious kids movie. There's still a lot of silly stuff in it, but it does have those moments.
Yeah. But no, like just the idea of seeing like Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny in the same scene together was pretty mind blowing. Like just the idea that Disney and Warner Brothers were willing to like come together to let their characters be on screen together. Like you just know that nowadays, like that would never ever happen.
Well, no, that's not true. It'll happen when Disney eventually buys Warner Brothers and
Yeah,
Hollywood folds in on itself, if that ever happens.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Especially with like
But
some of
I
the.
will say one thing. I don't know if I'm saying anything that interesting about this film, but that hasn't been already said. But one thing I can say is, it is impossible to overstate how important this movie is, like from a historical perspective, just in terms of this movie made American animation specifically like popular again
Mm-hmm.
after it hadn't been for a couple decades, at least not with adults.
Yeah,
Like, it made it popular. Because this movie kind of returned to that sort of raunchier kind of 40s. Well, it tried to return to this kind of raunchier 19, but still like 1940s appropriate style of humor, where it's a little racy if you're a kid, but a kid can still enjoy it, which is what a lot of the kind of Tex Avery cartoons it's harkening back to were like.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, because the movie tried to basically, I know that Richard Williams, he said that the approach to animation, like, is that they were trying to kind of combine the approaches of Disney, Tex Avery, and Warner Brothers together into one thing. So it's
Mm-hmm.
got like, you look at Roger himself, he has a very like Avery-esque character design that you would see in one of those cartoons, and he starred in a series of shorts after the movie, a series of like a trilogy of short films that were
Yeah.
also beautifully animated, and they kind of felt like they were trying to be like Tex Avery shorts, just on an even bigger budget,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking, than what he would have had.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I agree.
and
Cause oh, sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, no, but I'm just saying this movie is. A lot of people think of The Little Mermaid as the movie that started the Disney Renaissance, or
Yeah.
the animation Renaissance in general, but really it was Roger Rabbit, I would argue, more so than The Little Mermaid, that kind of ended what people think of as the dark age of American animation.
Mm-hmm.
It was Roger Rabbit and like a couple of TV shows that were coming out at the time. Like, you had the new Mighty Mouse Adventures, you had DuckTales, you had like Tiny Toons, some of these shows coming out
Yeah.
around the same era, and those things kind of were the end of what people think of as the dark age of American animation and the beginning of the Renaissance age.
Yeah, no, I can see that because I know Richard Williams because when he came on board to do Roger Rabbit, he assembled his own team of animators, and he specifically didn't go with any of the Disney animators because he didn't think that at the time Disney's animation studio was like up to par with what he wanted, and that actually was what kind of inspired them to really push the boundaries and make what became the Little Mermaid. So I do agree with you that if not, well, I don't know. I mean, I know I'm kind of scrambling to think of.
Hello?
Hello? Someone? Oh, there you are.
Oh,
Sorry,
could
there you
you
are.
could you not hear me?
I couldn't hear you for a few seconds. I heard you say we might not have, and then you trailed off.
Oh, yeah, no worries. What I was saying was that if not for Roger Rabbit, we might not have the Disney Renaissance. Like, we wouldn't have movies like The Little Mermaid or Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast.
Well, yeah, there's that. And the thing about it is, this came out shortly after the last remaining members of the Nine Old Men had retired, and it was the new generation of Disney animators. So I can kind of understand almost why Richard Williams might not think they were good enough yet.
Yeah, yeah, it's just
Like these were kind of the younger generation of like Boomer and Gen X Disney animators.
yeah,
Uh, and the thing about somebody like Richard Williams is he very much treats animation like a science, and his drawings don't always have as much. You could argue his drawings are sometimes a little drab. They don't have as much life in them as, a lot of the other great animation artists who are of similar legendary status to him.
mm-hmm.
But the fact that but he's the only person who could have done something like this because of that, because of his kind of, like I said, his kind of scientific approach to how to animate, because that's all over the movie, and I don't think the movie would work without it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like, because I mean, we'll get into it with some of the other like older examples of live action animated movies, but like with Roger Rabbit, it was really the first time where you could like believe that a cartoon character was interacting with a live person, because in a lot of older examples, it just kind of seemed like the animated character or the live action character was just like spliced over an image, like a live actor was.
Well, yeah,
just...
they would generally lock the camera down to make it easier to animate, so you didn't have to animate the character moving with the camera movement, and they would generally not put as much shading on the characters as Roger Rabbit did.
Yeah, but with Roger Rabbit, like, they went the extra mile of not only adding in the shading, but also on the physical side, they made like all kinds of props and devices that would simulate their movements, and then the animators would like draw over that. So they went above and beyond.
I wanted to talk about that because one thing that's not discussed a lot as much with this movie is, because everyone talks about the animation, is that it's actually got a lot of impressive practical effects work in it, because this was before, like, if this movie were made 10 or 20 years later, they'd have just used CG for a lot of things. But every time like a cartoon character is holding a physical, like, real world object, they had to do that. They had to move the object with practical effects trickery. They couldn't just CG it.
Yeah, no, exactly. I guess because I mean, I feel like we've already said everything that can be said about this movie, but just on a side note, I would highly recommend you guys check out. Yesterworld did a video about the history of Roger Rabbit. I think that's a great video to watch if you're interested in learning more about the history, and also learning stuff like the fact that originally Roger was going to be played by Pee Wee Herman himself, which that really came as a shock to me.
Yeah, I've seen those early pencil tests, and I actually understand why they're not badly animated, but I can understand why Williams would have looked at them and thought they weren't good enough.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess moving on, Mimi, what movie did you want to talk about next?
Well, since we've talked about Roger Rabbit, I actually want to talk about the kind of pseudo sequel to it that came out not too long ago, quickly, which is Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, the movie.
Yeah, I actually avoided this movie because when I first saw the trailer for it, I was like, ew, like it uh, it didn't look good, and people were like getting all psyched about it, like, oh my god, this movie's gonna be great, and I'm like, really?
Yeah, this movie, I will say, my biggest problem with this movie, or one of them at least, is how ugly it is.
Mm-hmm.
That it's throwing together a lot of these different animation styles that don't that look ugly. They don't mesh well. There's not a lot of rhyme or reason to how the movie looks, but uh and in it they make fun of other animation styles, right? They make fun of the Robert Zemeckis motion capture movies and
Mm-hmm.
movies that use like realistic motion capture in general. There's a whole section of the movie where they go to a part of town called the Uncanny Valley,
Mm-hmm.
where where it's like this street where all these motion capture characters are hanging out, and they make jokes about how they, just the jokes you've heard a million times about how they just look wrong and their eyes are dead and weird. They
Yeah.
don't make eye contact right, etc., which is fine. I guess I don't mind that. But the problem I have is that the movie's own animation is just as ugly looking as the things they make fun of. Like
Yeah.
the fact that everybody's talked about this, the fact that Chip and Dale, one of them is CG and one of them is supposed to be hand drawn, but he's just CG made to look like hand drawn animation, and not even very well, because I don't know if this was before they had the technology to make the lines boil at all or have it redraw them, but he just looks so ugly. And
Yeah.
that is a big problem with the movie. But I will say I consider it a Roger Rabbit sequel or spin-off of sorts, because it does seem to take place in the same universe as Roger Rabbit, just in modern times instead of the 40s.
Yeah. I could see
And
that.
with because Roger does have a brief cameo in it, right? So it seems to be the same world, sort of, unless it's an extra meta world where the original Roger Rabbit was also just a movie. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I know there's a bit
it's
where they go to visit like several characters at a convention doing autographs, and they run into like ugly movie Sonic, and they make a bit about him like getting in on the joke, and he's saying like, nobody can make fun of me if I'm in on the joke, and then another character's like, are you though? And that is kind of what the new Chip and Dale movie sort of felt like, at least from what I saw, that it seemed like
yeah.
they were trying to
But
make.
Ugly Sonic's another great example of them making fun of other animation, even though their own animation is ugly also.
Yeah, it's kind of that old thing of, the pot calling the kettle black. It's like, you can't really make fun of bad animation when your animation is pretty poor.
Yeah, and there are times when there are times when they try to sort of they do kind of have to over explain what the joke is for a general audience, like when they have to explain the Uncanny Valley joke and things, when they have to be like, you remember those animated movies from the 2000s where everything looked real but nothing looked right or something, and it's like, yeah, I do. You don't have to over explain it to me, but I guess that's for normies who are watching.
Yeah, but but
who
see
aren't
but see Mimi, you don't understand. The joke becomes even funnier when you have to explain it to people.
Yeah, and there's also now there's one joke in the movie that I've seen some debate around, where Seth Rogen's playing this motion capture character who's sort of meant to be like a parody of a character you'd see in Beowulf or something like that. And he
Hmm.
runs into Pumbaa from the live action Lion King, well, the quote unquote live action Lion King
Yeah.
remake. He's like, what are you staring at? And he's like, honestly, your weird dead eyes, dude. And I've seen some debate about this. Some people have argued that was actually a subtle pot shot at the 2019 Lion King movie for also having dead-eyed characters. Uh, but they were trying to do it in a subtle way where Disney would still approve of it. I've seen other people argue, no, if that's what it was meant to be, Disney would never allow that through. But it's an ambiguous joke.
Yeah, well, I would argue that it's kind of weird to imply that would be a joke, just because of the fact that that movie made so much money. It's like, I think it's currently like the fourth or fifth highest grossing film of all time. So there's no way like Disney would allow any kind of joke about that to be in one of their movies.
Yeah, they wouldn't, but it's possible that the writers put that in like stealthfully as something that Disney
Yeah.
wouldn't detect as a joke about the Lion King
Yeah.
remake.
And I guess kind of on that same topic of like problematic jokes, I guess we should address the elephant in the room, the whole joke about the Peter Pan character in the movie, who's basically supposed to be an allegory for the real life actor Bobby Driscoll, and how in the Chip and Dale movie he's like this washed up actor who's like betrayed as the main villain, when in real life Disney kind of screwed over Bobby Driscoll of the real world, where like he was a very prominent child actor, but then once he got older, Disney, and I'm probably getting a lot of this info wrong, this is from what I remember, but basically they blacklisted him because they felt that he was too old to like really be a bankable star, and his career like basically ended, and I think he also committed game end at some point. I don't know, how truthful is that?
Well, I couldn't exactly tell you what the intention of the filmmakers were. I know I've heard stories about how at some point they were considering making the villain of the movie Charlie Brown as an adult, and maybe if they'd done that, the people wouldn't read into the weird implications as much. But it's hard for me to believe that nobody at Disney brought up the Bobby Driscoll parallels at any point in production, though, because somebody would have to know, even if Andy Samberg and friends did.
Yeah. I don't know, like
I will say, I promise, I do have some positive. I don't hate this movie. I want to make that clear, even though I've said mostly negative things about it, because I do have one more kind of criticism of the movie, and this comes from this is kind of a dorky criticism, but it still stands. You know, it's like a criticism. How do I put this? In the movie, they present Chip and Dale as characters from who got big off of an 80s TV show, right? Who got big off of Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, but now they're sort of older and washed up.
Sure.
Like, well, Chip and Dale didn't get big off Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. They came from shorts with characters like Donald Duck fighting with them that came out all the way back in the 40s. So I'm like, and the movie just acts like the 40s shorts never existed, because that's not what millennials are nostalgic for. They're nostalgic for the 80s cartoon.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And Sparky in the chat just said, biggest crime this film committed, butchering Gadget's character. Yeah, I had heard something about where they made it so that Gadget had like an affair with the Fly from the show.
Well, I think they did that almost as like a middle finger to fans of the original series who were wanting to see like who she ended up with, I guess, who were like, you know, they decided to pair her with the one member of the cast nobody shipped her with, which is the Fly.
I got you. And Goodly Draws, have a good night. I just saw him in the chat. I guess he's heading out for the night. Yeah,
so those are some of my thoughts on that movie, but I will say this, as far as like a giant IP crossover movie, this does in some ways do it better than something like Space Jam 2, because the IPs they pull in this movie are bizarre. Like there are some weird cameos of there are like characters you'd never expect to see in a Disney movie. Like there are DreamWorks characters who cameo in this, for one. In some ways it feels more like a DreamWorks movie than a Disney movie, especially, you know, back when DreamWorks movies were kind of ugly back in the 2000s. But it has DreamWorks characters in it. It's got Mr. Natural, the Robert Crumb character, has a brief cameo in it.
Interesting.
There are South Park characters have cameos in it. It's really bizarre.
Yeah. But no, I mean, to be fair, doing anything better than Space Jam 2 is not that hard. I mean, basically that movie could have just been called Warner Brothers the Movie, because it felt like Warner Brothers was flexing on the fact that they own so many properties. Like, you know, hey, we have the Looney Tunes, we have Harry Potter, it
was like Warner Brothers trying to be Disney in a weird way, trying to really hammer in their brand name to a degree they don't usually.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I can't really speak too much on this because I never saw it. But I don't know. Maybe at some point I'll give it a shot, but I'm not expecting a whole lot. But anyway,
I will say too, this is a movie. I feel like I don't know if Chris Chan has ever seen this movie, but I think he would love it if he did because it really feels like his dimensional merge prophecy in movie form.
yeah, as much as I don't really like to bring Chris Chan up, I honestly can kind of see that,
The
unfortunately.
fact that hey, ugly Sonic shows up and some of the My Little Pony friendship as magic ponies have a brief cameo in it too. Those are all things I feel he'd appreciate in particular.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess on that note, we'll move on to the next movie. This is one that when I was doing my research, I had actually kind of forgotten this movie existed for some reason. But it's one that I remember weirdly liking as a kid. I don't know if it holds up at all nowadays. It probably doesn't. But let me pull it up. That would be making sure I've got it pulled up correctly. Osmosis Jones. Like, this is one of those movies from the early 2000s that I actually do remember seeing in theaters. And I don't know, for some reason, I thought this movie did fairly well because I remember it had a cartoon on Kids WB back in the day, but I was kind of shocked to discover that this movie was actually a flop when it came out. Like, I don't know. I guess I never really realized that it didn't do very
Yeah,
well.
all of Warner Brothers' attempts at making like an animated movie during the Renaissance era, I think all of them were flops. I'm not sure that any succeeded.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if memory serves, I think the reason why they really got into it was because like Spielberg was more or less booted out of anything to do with Roger Rabbit, so he partnered up with Warner Brothers to make a bunch of to make these animated movies. Like I remember they did a sequel to An American Tail. They did, of course, The Iron Giant, Osmosis Jones, Cats Don't Dance, and yeah, I do think the movie actually did all those movies did bomb, which is definitely upsetting in the case of The Iron Giant because that's an amazing film. But Osmosis
Yeah,
Jones,
but that's I was talking about that movie last time. That's one of those movies that bombed when it came out that is so culturally ubiquitous now that you don't really think of it as a bomb. It's kind of like, Scott Pilgrim or like Willy Wonka where it's so famous at this point that it's kind of hard to think of it as a failure.
yeah,
So, it had its day in court, it succeeded over time.
yeah. And real quick, Doctor Storm, welcome by the way, in the chat says Inside Out plagiarized this movie according to the Nostalgia Critic. Uh, I would say I don't know. I mean, it might just be a huge coincidence, but I would disagree with that simply because Inside Out is about emotions, whereas like Osmosis Jones is about like the actual like workings of the human body, like cells and
Yeah.
organs and things
It's
like
not
that.
as psychological. There are some similarities, like the fact that in both movies there's a scene where they go to a movie theater that shows the dreams of the person they're inside, like their dreams are the movies in this theater.
Yeah, which
They both have that as a plot point.
yeah, but I'd say I mean in both cases that is kind of a minor thing. Like it's not like it's integral to the plot. But but like I don't know, it like Osmosis Jones kind of going back to what I was saying before. It is just such a weird fever dream of a movie. No pun intended cuz that's that's the main plot of the movie is them having to like
It's an anthrax dream.
Why did I bring you on again? No, but no,
Well, no, I mean the bad guy. He's Anthrax, right?
no,
He's
I
supposed to be.
yeah, I know what you mean. But no, I do remember the villain of the movie Anthrax actually being kind of badass. With like these like this big claws and whatnot. But I remember also thinking like because obviously this movie is a hybrid of live action and animation, but it's a case where like none of the animated characters like necessarily interact with the live action characters. Like, I mean, other than like a scene or two of like Ozzy and Drax being outside of Bill Murray, there's never a scene where they directly interact with Bill Murray. So it's not like Roger Rabbit or Chip and Dale, where like the live action and animated characters are interacting with one another. It's more like they
Yeah,
both.
but it cuts back and forth between them enough that I think it still counts.
Yeah. Oh, and Dr. Storm in the chat mentioned Lawrence Fishburne voiced the villain. That actually checks out because I mean
Yeah.
he's got an amazing voice. Um,
I will say this: the villain in the movie is one of the most memorable things about it because I will say this: it's not that there's a lot to him necessarily, but the scenes where there are scenes in the movie where he kills microorganisms. He kills them in ways that would kind of make it like a slasher movie if it were live action and he was doing this to people.
yeah, I
It's
could see
very
that.
brutal. There are a couple of very brutal killings in the movie. One that they kind of have to soften by showing that the guy's disembodied mouth is still alive afterwards because he's just a blob. But
Yeah.
yeah, the opening scene where he pokes the guy with his finger and then the guy explodes into red fluid is very violent.
Yeah, and actually another note I wanted to mention, I'm trying to remember if it was, I think it might have been mentioned on Super Mega, but they brought up an interesting point about the movie and the cartoon, because at the end of the movie, Bill Murray like has now got a new lease on life, and he's trying to be healthier. Like it ends with him going on a hike with his daughter, like while eating a stick of celery, like he's trying to get healthy. But then at the beginning of the show, when we see him, like, well, first of all, the daughter's never mentioned, and then second of all, he's like this big, fat, greasy guy eating like like a bucket of chicken, and he's like gross and fat and disgusting. And then like Ozzy and Drax end up like leaving his body into like a young person's body. So it's
His name is Drix, by the way. You keep saying Drax like the Guardians of the Galaxy
oh
guy. His name is
oh
Drix.
okay, sorry, I completely forgot. Um, but no, I don't know. It just seems like what happened between the events of the movie and the cartoon that led to whatever that character's name was, like turning into like this fat slob, like it was still the beginning of the movie.
People relapse all the time. They try to get better and they fail, unfortunately, in the real world.
I
But
mean, I
I'll say this.
guess
I will say something about Osmosis Jones, which I'm sure a million people have said already, which is that this movie would be better if it weren't as much of a live action animation hybrid. Like if you really cut down a lot of the Bill Murray stuff and expanded the animated stuff, I think you could have a better movie.
yeah, because I will admit, like even as a kid, not that the live action stuff was bad, but I did find, well, granted, it was also because I was a kid and I was more into cartoons as a kid, but I do feel like the animated stuff, like seeing how this world within a human body like functioned, I don't know, like that stuff I found was more interesting than like this whole human drama with Bill Murray and Molly Shannon and all that. Like I just didn't really care.
Yeah, and you talk about Roger Rabbit being scary. I will say one weird thing about Osmosis Jones that kind of upset me as a kid that wasn't really meant to be upsetting in any way, I don't think, is the fact that there's a scene where the mayor basically uses this override switch to take control of Bill Murray's body and make him ask for a cold pill. And I was always like, huh, so what are they? I guess this movie's just saying that the germs in your body can take you over in an emergency. And I mean, maybe it's supposed to be seen more metaphorically, but it's just kind of weird. It's another one of
Yeah.
those things that makes it more like Inside Out, where it's like, okay, this germ can just take control of you, I guess. Even though he's not an emotion, he's kind of doing what they do in those movies.
Yeah. And real quick, Sparky the chat said this was the inspiration for the anime cells at work, and nobody can convince me otherwise. Yeah, I'll take your word for it, I guess. Um, but no, yeah. Like I said, Osmosis Jones, like it's. I mean, part of me wants to revisit it just because I haven't seen it in so long. I don't know if it holds up at all. But I don't know. I just think it's still interesting to like go back and see
I don't know
movies.
another not so fun fact about this movie that gets brought up a lot.
What's that?
Well, this movie, as you may recall, features a cameo by Kid Rock, who is playing Kidney Rock. That's
Oh.
pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
He's playing Kidney Rock at this club, right?
Yeah.
And he sings this song called Cool Daddy Cool. And if you listen to this full song, not what's in the movie of it, but like what's on the album, uh, this song has basically Kid Rock talking about how much he loves having sex with underage girls as a lyric. The actual lyric is young ladies, I like them underage. See, some say that's statutory, but I say it's mandatory.
Uh,
That's an actual lyric. I don't think you hear it at any point in the movie, but it's part of the song that is in the movie.
yeah. Well, I feel like that's even more problematic because if memory serves, I think one of the nightmares that Bill Murray's character has is one that involves like his best friend marrying his like underage daughter. So the
Oh
fact that
yeah, I forgot about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so the fact that that song is in the soundtrack, like I don't know, it just that just makes it even weirder, honestly.
So is Bill? Do we think Bill Murray's character? Do we think his friend in the movie is a secret nonce?
I
And he
don't.
knows about it and nobody else does, or do you think it's just a random weird dream like we all have sometimes?
I'm just gonna say it was a random weird dream and just move on from there because I don't want to think about it any more than I have to. So anyway, I guess moving on. What movie did you want to talk about next?
Let me think. You want to go ahead and talk about the edgier Roger Rabbit, which is Cool World?
Oh yeah. Let me pull it up just really quick. Yeah, Cool World. From legendary film animator Ralph Bakshi. I think wasn't this the last movie he animated? Like the last full
Yeah,
movie
this
he
was
did?
his final movie. He did I think a couple short films after this. Like he did Malcolm and Melvin slash Babe He Calls Me duology, and he did Last Days of Coney Island. I
Hmm.
think that was the final thing he ever did back in 2013, but this
Yeah,
was the last full movie he did,
yeah. It is.
animated at least.
Yeah,
I don't remember if Cool and the Crazy was after this.
yeah. It is. I mean, this is one of those movies that I kind of feel like the story behind it might be more fascinating than the movie itself. Because from what I understand, like part of the reason why Bakshi made this film was because he wanted to work with a bigger studio. Because at the time he was just working very independently, and he got in touch with Paramount because the producer in the film, I mean at the studio, Frank Mancuso Jr. I guess like had it out for like because I think they were going to be working on the Don Bluth movie and that fell apart. So Mancuso wanted to like make his own animated movie to like spite Bluth, and that ended up being Cool World. And like I don't know, from what I understand, like this movie was supposed to be a lot more hard edged than what we actually got. Because like because I'm obviously I actually haven't seen this movie, so I'm not sure how factual a lot of what I'm saying is. But like this movie was supposed to be like a lot raunchier, more like R-rated, but then the studio had him
Well,
tone it down.
it was supposed to be a slasher. It was supposed to have basically it was supposed to be a movie about a guy who creates his cartoon waifu character. Obviously, not a term that would have been around at the time, but
Yeah.
he creates his cartoon waifu character, and she comes to life, and he has sex with her, and then they uh I'm sorry if I can't say that. Sorry. And they produce an offspring who is a half cartoon, half human killer, similar to Judge Doom from Roger Rabbit. And that's what the movie was going to be about originally. It was going to be about this half human, half cartoon killer, but it became something radically different when it was rewritten by the studio. And Ralph Bakshi punched a producer over it, and it's a wonderful story.
Yeah, I actually, because real quick, I was pulling up the Wikipedia article on the movie, and according to a phone interview that Bakshi did, he said, and I quote, "I never punched Frank Mancuso Jr., the producer. That was just a rumor. I yelled at him a couple times, but that wasn't his fault. I like Frank. I
I
never
would
punched
say
him. Can you set that straight?"
that might be a newer interview because for the longest time I thought the story was that he punched him, and I could believe that he would, but
Yeah.
maybe I guess if he didn't, that's less interesting. But oh well, it's just what I thought was true for the longest time.
Yeah, no worries. But one other thing I find interesting is that So Bakshi had always wanted to cast Brad Pitt in the movie because at the time he was, fairly young, but still like had a lot of promise. Because I think at this point he had just done like Thelma and Louise, so he was coming up. But he also wanted to cast Drew Barrymore as one of the leads, but the studio didn't think she was a big enough name, which is kind of crazy to think about in retrospect. But like, I think this is around the time when she was like, her life was in shambles. Like, she had like drug and alcohol abuse problems, and she was more or less blacklisted from the industry. So they wanted a bigger star, and that's how we got Kim Basinger for the movie. But I don't know. It is still unfortunate that this was like his last film, considering the pedigree that Bakshi has. I mean, Lord of the Rings, Wizards, Heavy Traffic, Fire and Ice, and then for it all to end with Cool World. It is very.
I will say this about Bakshi. I'm a big Ralph Bakshi fan, even though, and I feel that his movies are sometimes, some of them are bad, but they're never like boring bad. They're always bad in an interesting way, and Cool World is definitely that. It is kind of another guilty pleasure movie of mine. It's because the thing is, like, I would say Fire, and this is maybe a controversial opinion, I would say Fire and Ice is the only Bakshi movie that I find like boring and hard to sit through all the way.
Fair enough.
Cool World is not boring. It's bad, but you can't take your eyes off it.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's just one of those, like, it's not, boring bad. It's more like fun bad, I guess you could say.
I would say more like just crazy, like nonsense bad. Like it's like in terms of just, because the thing is, the movie, I mean, Bakshi used the movie as an excuse, really, just to do interesting visuals, even though he had issues with the script. It's kind of like what Richard Williams did with Raggedy Ann and Andy: A Musical Adventure, to go back to Williams, who we mentioned earlier, where it's like, okay, the script is kind of nonsensical, but I'm just going to use it as a vehicle to do interesting things with the medium. And Cool World does have a lot of interesting visuals in it. A lot of the city, the design of the actual Cool World itself, where you have all these like twisted up buildings with faces on them and everything is like anthropomorphized. It's really cool looking. Like, you could hang a lot of these background paintings in a museum. I think they're that interesting. But
yeah,
but the movie going on in front of them, on the other hand, is not so great.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of like and obviously I'm not saying Cool World is as bad as this, but it's kind of like 8 Crazy Nights, where like the animation itself is like beautiful. It's just what's being animated is not good at all.
Well, I would say, well, Cool World is a much more like visually interesting movie though, whereas 8 Crazy Nights was trying to do like grounded animation where there's nothing that fantastical about it for the most part.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I, like I said, I've always been curious about Cool World just because of its reputation of like, a box office flop and the end of a prolific animator's career.
I will say this too, even though the animation in the movie, I do think a lot of it is interesting to look at, it does not integrate well with the live action. You never really believe that the real people in the cartoons are actually touching each other or interacting. It always looks very fake, even though the animation itself, I would not say is bad. It's just not integrated well.
Yeah, because I mean, looking at the still that I used for Cool World, like it does sort of seem like you can clearly tell that Brad Pitt's just like on a green screen. Like, it doesn't look like he's actually interacting with Hollywood. Like, in fact, I don't think they even have like matching eye lines. Like, it looks like he's like looking just slightly below her eye line.
Yeah, and Roger Rabbit, they really took a lot of care with that kind of thing. Like, there was a specific scene in Roger Rabbit where Eddie Valiant is looking too high for where they were going to draw Roger, so they had to have Roger stand on his tiptoes to match his eye line in that scene. The animators did, so that's how much they were on the ball and how much they cared about that, whereas Cool World doesn't really care about that stuff.
Yeah.
Not as much.
Well, I mean, the movie more or less was kind of made to capitalize on the success of Roger Rabbit, so them not really giving a lot of care and attention to it probably is indicative of the fact that they just wanted to, make their own Roger Rabbit because, hey, that movie did so well. Why don't we ride off the coattails of it? And it didn't quite pan out. I guess.
Yeah.
I guess it kind of.
But it is a movie I would recommend watching it at least once.
Yeah.
It is, like I said, it's an interesting kind of bad movie, and
like
I don't know if we're gonna talk about. I don't know if we're gonna talk about, because I brought this movie up. I don't know if we're gonna talk about Monkey Bone at all or not, but I would compare that movie and Cool World to each other very much. They're very similar in terms of the kind of just weird bad that they are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could touch a little bit on Monkey Bone. I don't have the image pulled up, so I'm just going to switch back to the fireplace for right now. But yeah, Monkey Bone, I don't know if I've actually seen the movie in its entirety. I've seen like snippets of it, just catching it on TV randomly.
Neither have I, and that's the problem. I tried sitting through the whole thing once, and I got to the scene where Brendan Fraser is possessed by Monkey Bone, and he's showing this farting monkey toy to a group of businessmen, and he's having it fart while triumphant music plays, and it's all slow motion, and they're applauding and cackling like hyenas. And when I got to that scene, I just gave up. I was like, I don't feel like watching the rest of this. But
Fair.
maybe I'll finish it at some point.
Yeah, that's fair. I do remember when the movie came out, though. I vaguely remember seeing trailers for it. Excuse me, and I thought it looked really cool. Like it had all this dark, twisted, like very Nightmare Before Christmas esque like feel to it, which makes sense because it's from
a lot like Cool World.
Yeah, but I mean the Nightmare Before Christmas comparison makes sense because it's from the same director, Henry Selick, not Tim Burton.
Yeah. Selick, he did Coraline, which I mentioned before is one of my favorite movies, but this is very much not that.
Yeah. And Emily, I don't know too much about the history of Monkey Bone, but from what I understand, like, because I think it's based off a book or something like that, it's
off a comic called Darktown.
Yeah, that's it. I've heard the comic is like much darker than the movie we got. So I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I guess I'd be kind of curious to see how the movie compares to the book, because I guess it's sort of like how with The Mask, which I almost included on this list, but we kind of decided probably doesn't really count, where the original source material is like much darker than the film we got. I would be kind of curious if like had they gone further with the darkness in the original comic,
there's definitely dark stuff in the movie, but it doesn't feel like it's aware of itself, if that makes any sense. Like it's just kind of like, oh, his sister is looking forward to his death, and that's just played off like, haha, isn't that silly? Like it doesn't feel like the movie, or the fact that Monkey Bone symbolizes the guy's repressed sexual urges or whatever. Like he is the guy's private parts persona, or well, what's the primate version of personification? Whatever, you know what I mean? Just made into a cartoon character, and the movie just kind of throws this stuff in like, haha, isn't that silly? And it's like, well, no, this is kind of messed up, and you're not really treating it that way.
Yeah.
No. This is when I talked about Beetlejuice sort of like wannabe movies. Monkey Bone is definitely one of those. I would consider it kind of a Beetlejuice wannabe film. It's going for that tone.
I can see that.
It's going for that type of character with Monkey Bone. He is like a Beetlejuice-esque character, but it didn't work out.
Yeah. Oh, and real quick, Dr. Storm in the chat brought up anthropomorphize. I think that's what you were trying to think of.
Well, it was, but I'm like, well, technically he's not a human. I was thinking, what does it mean when you translate something into an ape instead of a human? I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you.
Or a monkey. Sorry, not an ape, a monkey. He has a tail.
Yeah, get it right. I guess kind of talking about Henry Selick, one other like kind of weird fever dream of a movie from my childhood I wanted to bring up was James and the Giant Peach. Like, this is one of those movies that,
Yeah.
much like Osmosis Jones, I remember watching it as a kid and I really loved it, but like looking back on it, I'm like, what was I on as a kid? Because this movie is really fucking weird.
Yeah, it's really weird. Again, to compare it to something like Coraline, it's just as weird as Coraline, but it's not really as smartly written or structured, I don't think. It's not one of I know it's adapted from a Roald Dahl book, and I've read some Roald Dahl growing up, but I never read the original James and the Giant Peach book, so maybe it's different, but if it is like the movie, I would say it's probably one of his weaker stories, but
Yeah.
but the movie is interesting for how kind of odd it is.
Yeah, like how, and because I do remember like very specific scenes from the movie. Like I remember there's a scene where they encounter like a metal shark. I remember, I think towards the end there's like this finale where the boy and the creatures inside the peach like come out and they're all still stop motion, and the two ants that the boy was living with are like strung up on the Statue of Liberty or something like that. Like, again, it's a movie that like bits of it stick in my head, but I don't remember the whole thing. So that's why I consider it like a weird fever dream movie where I'm not sure if I actually
I love the tone of it. I love the whimsy of it, but I cannot say it's a great movie.
Yeah, not quite. Like, I don't know.
It doesn't come together. It doesn't really have as much of a point to it as a lot of other Roald Dahl stories. Like, what is the message of James and the Giant Peach? It's not as interesting or clear.
Yeah, I mean, granted, like you, I haven't read the Roald Dahl story, so I'm not sure how faithful an adaptation the movie is to the book. But I don't know, because like at least something like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you can argue that the moral of that story is to just be kind to others, be a good kid, don't fall into temptation and everything. But like, yeah, James and the Giant Peach, it's like, what are you supposed to get out of it?
Everything in Willy Wonka kind of, it has a message, and everything in the story is kind of structured to support it. Whereas something like James and the Giant Peach, it's just kind of random. It's just like, I guess it tries to have like some pathos. It tries to have some evil characters who get their comeuppance, I guess, but I don't know, it's just weird.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like it's just weird for the sake of being weird. But I was actually going to bring up this thing about how it just seems like between Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline, Henry Selick just had this period of time where like none of the movies he made after Nightmare Before Christmas really took off until Coraline. So I don't know, it just seems kind of odd to me that it took him a whole decade to like find some modicum of success again.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if he's made a full movie since then.
Yeah, I mean, well, I know, I don't know if he's necessarily the head of Leica, or at least like one of the animators who's worked there, but yeah, I think other than Coraline, a lot of the other movies they didn't do so well. I
just mean in terms of movies Henry Selick has directed. I know he did Wendell and Wild, but I don't know if that really took off.
Yeah, I couldn't say either. But yeah, I don't know. Like, James and the Giant Peach, kind of like Osmosis Jones, is another one that I do want to revisit at some point, because I mean, I don't know if it holds up well at all, and to be honest, I'm not sure if it was even good back when I was a kid, but it would at least be interesting to see it through like new, like older eyes, I guess.
I will say it is sort of a dreamlike movie. It does kind of feel like you're watching a creative person's dream more so than a coherent story when you watch it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I guess what did you want to touch on next?
Let's see. You want to talk about Mary Poppins?
Yeah, we can touch on Mary Poppins. I mean, this is
an older pre-Roger Rabbit example.
Yeah, because I kind of hinted at it before that like before movies like Roger Rabbit, a lot of animated like a lot of live action movies that incorporated animation had this like feel where you could tell that like neither the two are really interacting with one another. Like it just sort of looks like, in the case of Mary Poppins, Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews are just like pasted on top of like an animation cell. They're not actually like you can kind of tell that they're just on a green screen while they're being placed in front of an animation. But I mean, I don't know. Mary Poppins, like, it is definitely a classic Disney film, for sure. And Emily, the animated sequences, like, they don't hold up all that well in terms of like actually looking good. But they do have their own little charm to them, I guess you could say. I mean, if nothing else, it did give us the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious musical number, and that's become very iconic.
I'll say this, the actual animation in the animated segments of this movie, it's well done. It's, classic, like, 9 Old Men era stuff, but this was coming out in the 60s when they were moving to the Xerox method, where everything was just, like, had kind of duller colors, and they just scanned the pencil lines instead of inking it, so everything does look a little rough and a little shabby for that reason, even though the under animation is fine.
Yeah, and because I remember as a kid, I did find some of the animation weird, like in the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious sequence, like you can tell that some of the animations like being looped, just as like a sort of a like a cheap out sort of thing.
Every studio was getting cheaper around this time. Disney was just doing it in a different way from the others, where they were like, okay, we're still gonna have full movement, we're not gonna skimp on the character movement, but we're gonna cut corners in a bunch of other ways.
Yeah, which probably is what kind of led to their downfall into the 70s and especially the 80s. But I mean, like, well, because with Mary Poppins, like, it's kind of different from the other movies we talked about, because even though it is live actors interacting with cartoon characters, that's not really the crux of the movie. That's only like one part of the entire film, because the rest of it is all live action, but it is kind of a live action cartoon, so I guess it sort of counts in a way.
Yeah, and I will say this, there's not as much to talk about in terms of the integration between the two. I will just say it's a good movie. It's like, the antithesis of what I was saying about James and the Giant Peach. I think Mary Poppins has much clearer themes that, tie together.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that.
It also, I will say, this movie kind of popularized the trope, though, of the family that you see in like a million family comedies, where the message is that the dad needs to stop taking his work so seriously and spend more time with his kids.
Yeah.
But in Mary Poppins, it made more sense, though, because he's this character who treats everything like business, including his family. He's this super uptight guy. He's not just a normal person who works a job because he has to, which is what a lot of later movies like this sort of made their protagonists out to be.
So what you're saying is Mary Poppins walked so Liar Liar could run.
Yeah, and a lot of other 90s comedies like that. There were a lot that did that trope.
Yeah. And I guess while we're talking about like this kind of era of live action animated movies, I guess we could touch on Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. I guess Disney's...
Yeah, this was kind of an attempt to have lightning strike twice and make a second Mary Poppins, but different enough to be its own thing.
Yeah, and I don't think this one, it didn't quite work as well, because I mean, I know there are people who consider this one to also be a classic Disney film, but like, it's definitely not on the same level as like Mary Poppins. Like, Mary Poppins is like one of the peak Disney movies from that era, whereas Bed Knobs and Broomsticks is kind of just like, oh yeah, that one movie that existed at some point. But I feel like this one also kind of, because I mentioned before the whole thing of like live actors being like spliced on top of animated footage. This one I feel like is much worse in that regard, because like from the still image, for instance, like the outline of the bed, just like it again just really emphasizes that whole like cut and paste sort of thing.
I will say, I believe this movie came out after Walt had died, and it came. If correct me, what's the exact year it came out? I forget.
Let me actually look it up really quick. 1971.
Yeah, so this would have been a couple years after Walt died, and this was during the era at Disney where their whole business model was trying to figure out what Walt would do if he were still alive.
Yeah.
Because that's I think why they tried to make Mary Poppins again, but different enough to be its own thing.
Yeah,
Where
because I
it's like this is the kind. A lot of Disney movies in the '70s have a very behind the times like feel to them compared to the rest of Hollywood at the time, where they still kind of look and feel like '50s or '60s movies. But
yeah, because I know that's
you
one.
could argue there's a charm to that. There is a kind of timeless quality to the better ones for that reason.
Yeah, because I know that's one of the things that kind of led to Disney's downfall into the 80s was the fact that in the 70s it felt like they were still like going with that 50s 60s mentality, whereas like Hollywood was pumping out movies like Star Wars and Jaws and Close Encounters, like these big tentpole blockbusters that people were flocking to go see, whereas stuff like Bedknobs and Broomsticks or Unidentified Flying Oddball or any of these other Disney movies were just like tanking at the box office.
Yeah, I think at first it's like, well, the new Hollywood stuff for adults, right? So Disney
Mm-hmm.
figured they were still going to fulfill the family niche, but toward the end of the decade, the new Hollywood crowd started encroaching on that niche because you had like Spielberg and you had Star Wars and stuff like that coming in.
Yeah, no, exactly. Let's see. I guess because since it's your turn to pick the movie, let's see. Which one did you want to touch on next?
Let's see. You want to talk about Space Jam now?
Yeah, Space Jam. Again,
we've hinted at it earlier.
yeah, definitely a big slice of my childhood because as somebody who grew up in the 90s, I can tell you that Space Jam really was like all to not make myself sound super old, this really was like the shiznit. Like every kid I knew back in the day like was all obsessed about Space Jam. And to me, I always kind of wondered like I mean, as a kid, I mostly loved it because even as a kid, I never cared about sports. I was more so interested in like the Looney Tunes and the Monstars aspect of it. But looking back, I'm just kind of like, why did this movie become so popular? Like, was it just because like the Looney Tunes were in fashion, or Michael Jordan was just really popular at the time? Like, I kind of don't get.
It is a time capsule movie of the era. And it was based on a successful series of commercials that came before it that had the Looney Tunes doing basketball stuff, advertising Air Jordans.
Okay, that makes sense. But no, like I remember when the second one came out and people were saying like, "Oh, this one's a disgrace to the original." I'm just kind of like, I mean, was the original really that good to begin with? I mean, I'm certainly nostalgic for it. Like again, I would never call it a good movie, but it's definitely one that like was a huge part of my upbringing. But again, it's just like I said, it's like I mean, yeah, the second one's terrible, but it's not like the original is that good of a movie to begin with.
Oh, the other thing that made the original successful, obviously, is the soundtrack. The movie has an iconic soundtrack. I would argue it's more iconic than the movie itself in certain ways.
Yeah, because
it's a lot like it's kind of like Sonic 06 in that regard. You know how nobody likes that game, but everybody loves the music. It's at least in the fan base. It's a kind of similar thing with the Space Jam soundtrack.
Yeah, and I like Dr. Storm in the chat said it's a commercial for a commercial for a commercial. Yeah, it really is because if memory serves, because I did rewatch this movie a few years ago. This movie like shoves a bunch of brand names in your face, like Gatorade and McDonald's and whatever else, like almost to like a parody sort of level. And I'm not sure if they meant for it to be a parody or not.
Well, the thing about this movie is, how do I say this? I feel like the movie has kind of become nostalgic in its own right, but I feel like if you were somebody who really loved tunes at the time and you were really and you weren't like a little child, you know, you were really nostalgic for those old shorts, I don't think you'd like Space Jam that much because uh it's not funny. The
Yeah.
Looney Tunes don't really act in what I would consider in character. I mean, not that they have to be the same way all the time, but there's a sort of like, oh, they all just kind of act like interchangeably wacky, and they act like they're one big family, like they're the Muppets or something, which has never been the case, you know? Like a lot of them hate each
Yeah.
other and would not be able to get along in the same room.
Yeah, because I think they did like touch on some of those aspects about what defined the characters. Like I think there is a gag about Sylvester always thinking of ways to get a Tweety bird, and like that's the closest they ever come to like acting like how you would expect them to. But yeah, a lot of the other ones, like like Bugs and Daffy, like they pretty much act no differently than from one another. Like you pretty much could just
Yeah,
swap.
I know that if I'm not mistaken, this maybe you could correct me, and this is another rumor like Bakshi punching the guy, but Chuck Jones really didn't like this movie, and he said something to the effect of, "I have worked with Porky Pig for decades, and he would never make a joke about wetting himself."
I mean, I don't know how truthful that is. I would, knowing Chuck Jones, like I would, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how he felt about it, but I don't know, like, yeah, that, I don't know. I do actually find that kind of funny. Let's see, I'm kind of doing some research right now on it. Um, let's see, I did find an Instagram post talking about it. He said, and I quote, "Oh, I thought it was terrible. As someone who worked with these characters for upwards of 40 years, I can tell you with the utmost confidence, Porky Pig would never say, 'I think I wet myself.' On the off chance that Bugs were to be faced with the situation of a basketball game standing between freedom and extraterrestrial domination, he wouldn't have needed anyone's help, and moreover, it wouldn't have taken him an hour and a half. Those aliens, whether they were tiny or colossal, would have been dealt with in short order come the 7-minute mark." Yeah, that I can see that because like Bugs Bunny was always known for being like a trickster or a shyster. Like even in like really seemingly impossible odds, he can always find some way out of it. So the fact that like he and the other Looney Tunes were like helpless to stop the aliens, like it does seem wildly out of character for them, and I can understand why Chuck Jones was upset about the movie.
Yeah. And of course, I love how he's one of those people who will, if he's gonna insult something, he'll do it in a very polite, uh, literary sort of way, like that.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, if he hated this movie, do you think like he would, like shit bricks if he saw Space Jam: A New Legacy?
I don't know. He was dead in the ground for 17 years before that movie came out. I'm sure he would. I don't know how he'd feel about it.
Yeah, my guess is, if there is such a thing as the afterlife, he probably came back to haunt the people behind Space Jam: A New Legacy. Like I now,
Yeah, you want to talk about Space Jam: A New Legacy briefly, but too, by the way, besides just talking about how terrible it is, because that's weird because that movie, it's like a movie that's, well, we talk about how the first movie is like a commercial for a commercial for a commercial.
mhm.
The third one is like just an additional layer of abstraction where it's like a commercial for a commercial for a commercial for a commercial.
Yeah, because like I said before, the second movie, like you can almost just call it Warner Brothers the movie because it felt like just Warner Brothers just kind of flexing on all the properties they own and like really hammering. Like it almost could work as a giant commercial for, well, I guess now it'd be called Max, but back then it was HBO Max. But I remember like one aspect of the movie that was really distracting to me was because like in the original Space Jam, you have like the audience in the background that are all like cartoon characters, but in the second movie for the audience they have like characters from other Warner Brothers movies, but they're all like clearly extras dressed up as those characters. Like you have one guy dressed as the Penguin from Batman Returns. You have Mr. Freeze from Batman and Robin. You have
Most infamously, you have the Droogs from A Clockwork Orange in the background.
I was gonna bring that up. The Droogs. You had Pennywise, and it's like, what kid is gonna like know who those characters are? Like, especially the Droogs. Like, what?
You don't get it, FilmNerd. It's for the adults. You know, it's to make them love this wonderful movie. movie that has so much to offer, though.
Well, guess what? I'm an adult and I fucking hated this movie, so it didn't work. But I will say there are two things about the movie, and only two, that I actually really liked. One is Don Cheadle. Like, I get the feeling Don Cheadle probably read the script and was like, wow, this movie's a piece of shit. Sign me up. And he has decided, you know what? I'm in a terrible movie. I'm just going to have as much fun with it as possible and just go really all out. Like, sort of like Michael Sheen in the Twilight movies, or Gina Gershon in Showgirls. Like his performance actually kind of makes the movie work. And there was one joke, and I repeat, one joke in the movie that actually kind of made me laugh. And I think they actually spoiled it in the trailer, where Daffy Duck's like, guys, I just got Michael Jordan back. We're saved. And they do like this whole build-up where they have a figure coming into frame, and they do the ba 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 music, and then they do the big reveal, and it's Michael B. Jordan, the actor. Like, I was like, oh, okay, that one actually kind of got me. You got one, Space Jam: A New Legacy. Doesn't make up for the rest of the bullshit, but you at least got me to laugh once.
Yeah, I figure since we just talked about Space Jam, I think we should talk about Back in Action also next.
Yeah, Looney Tunes Back in Action, which...
Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
This is a movie I actually like, even though it's not a great movie, but I actually like it. I think it's significantly better than Space Jam, but doesn't have as much... It didn't capture the cultural zeitgeist as much.
Yeah, because I'll admit, when I was... hang on, I'm just trying to fix something. When I was a kid, I, honest to God, thought that this movie was a sequel to Space Jam simply because, oh, hey, it's Looney Tunes, and they're interacting with live people. Like, I don't know, I just kind of made that connection. I mean, it helps too that I almost said Space Jam. Looney Tunes Back in Action was directed by Joe Dante, the guy who made like Piranha and The Howling and Gremlins and The Burbs. So I have no doubt this movie's infinitely better than Space Jam.
He was well, the thing is, Joe Dante was like friends with Chuck Jones. He kind of looked up to him as a mentor of sorts.
Yeah, because Jones even had a cameo in Gremlins.
Yeah, he did, and he did the animated, the little animated opening of Gremlins 2 was also done by him.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you get to this movie, how do I put this? Back in Action, I can't call it a great movie exactly, but it's better than Space Jam. It's got actual funny jokes in it, which it has some cool scenes. Like, I think the one scene everybody probably points to as the best part of it is there's a whole sequence where Elmer Fudd is chasing Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck through the Louvre, I believe. He's chasing them. They're in an art museum. They're jumping into these different paintings, and every time they do, they sort of take on the style of the painting they've jumped into. And that whole scene is great. That's just like a good Looney Tunes short film by itself if you divorce it from the rest of the movie.
I gotcha. Because I had heard about some of the jokes in this, and the ones I had heard actually kind of make me chuckle a little bit. Like, I think there's a bit where they go to like a character cafe, and there's a table where like Porky Pig and Speedy Gonzales are sitting at, and they're upset because they're considered politically incorrect. And there's another table where like Shaggy and Scooby are sitting, and their animation's like significantly worse than everybody else's. Like, hearing about those jokes,
they're chewing out Matthew Lillard because Shaggy is complaining about his performance in the live-action Scooby-Doo movie, which had just recently come out.
Yeah, which I'm sure knowing Joe Dante, I don't know if he actually did like the live-action Scooby-Doo movies, but knowing him, I wouldn't be surprised if he intended for that to be a jab at the live-action Scooby-Doo movies.
I'll say the best, how do I put this? One of my favorite lines of the whole movie, there's a bit, I can quote this line, because there's a bit where Daffy is like complaining about how he's basically carrying these shorts. He's better than Bugs Bunny, and they need to choose one or the other. He's talking to the executives. He's like, Brothers Warner, it's time to decide between a handsome matinee idol and this miscreant perpetrator of low burlesque. and they just look at him and they go, whichever one's not the duck.
Okay, that's kind of funny. But I mean, like, it does kind of make sense that like Daffy would sort of be like, and again, I haven't seen the movie, so I'm not sure how truthful this is. But it sounds like he is more or less the hero of the movie. It makes sense because I think Dante has even said that he always preferred Daffy Duck over Bugs Bunny.
I kind of did too as a kid, just because I felt like Daffy's shorts had more variety to them. There wasn't as much of a formula.
Yeah, that's true. And Daffy just kind of seems to fit more of Dante's like wild, like sensibilities from his movies. Like if you look at something like Gremlins or his segment from the Twilight Zone movie, like it does kind of have that same sort of zany energy that Daffy Duck was always known for in his shorts.
Yeah, so like I said, it's a better movie than Space Jam. It's worth watching at least once. It's sort of, it's better written. It has better jokes. So, but there's not that much else to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely want to check it at some point because I'm a huge fan of Joe Dante. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. So I might get to this one at some point. But I guess to kind of segue a little bit into the next movie that I wanted to talk about, this is another one of those like movies that I remember seeing as a kid that like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. Like, I remember seeing it, but I also kind of don't remember seeing it because I have such vague memories of it. And I don't know how many people will remember this movie, but back in like the early 2000s, I think there was a live action Rocky and Bullwinkle movie. And when I was doing my research for this stream, I was like, holy shit, I forgot that movie existed. And
yeah, we're not really including this is technically one of those movies where like this cartoon character comes into the real world and has to interact with a real life human protagonist. It's like the Smurfs or like Alvin and the Chipmunks. I guess, well, they don't trade up, they'll do a different world than that. But this is the one movie of that type that we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, I will admit I kind of am throwing this one in just because, again, like it kind of unlocked this like weird sort of deep-seated memory of mine that like I had kind of forgotten about this movie for so many years. And like I'll admit, when I was a kid, I actually really loved the Rocky and Bullwinkle shorts. I thought they were kind of fun, and I did watch a lot of those like Peabody and Sherman and Dudley Do Right, like the shorts, not the movies. And I remember when I heard about the movie, I thought, oh wow, this looks pretty cool. And I don't know, I think even as a kid, I was like, this is just weird because when the characters are brought into the real world, like Rocky and Bullwinkle are still like cartoony, but then you have all the villains like Boris, Natasha, and their leader and come into the real world, but instead of being like 3D cartoons, they're like real people, and it's like Robert De Niro and Jason Alexander and whoever else they got to play Natasha.
Yeah, there's no real consistency to how the rules of this universe work.
Yeah, I do remember. I do remember there were some jokes in the movie that, as a kid, I thought. Well, I don't know if I thought they were funny as a kid, but looking back on them, I do remember them being kind of funny. Like I think there's a part where Bullwinkle, I think, is in court, and the judge is Whoopi Goldberg, and she makes a comment about how celebrities are above the law. And I wonder if that's like meant to be a commentary about the fact that like it doesn't matter what you do, but as long as you're famous, you can get away with like just about anything.
Yeah, I will say this movie is kind of like Looney Tunes back in action in a way. I will say it's kind of like a less refined version of Looney Tunes back in action, but it's a similar thing where it's got some. I mean, it's kind of a road trip adventure thing with a live action person and these characters, and it's got some good jokes in it. It's not like a terrible comedy as much as some people make it out to be.
Yeah. Yeah, because hang on, I'm looking at the cast right now. Okay, all right, Rene Russo. Okay, Rene Russo was the one who played Natasha. I was trying to remember who it was. I'm looking at the cast right now. Like, wait, Janine Garofalo, Carl Reiner, Jonathan Winters, John Goodman, Keenan Kell. Like, what is with this cast? Like, this is a wild cast.
you could also argue. I would argue it has a sense of humor that's kind of like it's kind of like a Muppet movie in a way, but a lot of uh, it's. I mean, granted, Rocky and Bullwinkle, the TV show, predates the Muppets TV show, so
Yeah.
maybe that's a bad commentary, but it is kind of a similar style of humor. So I think if you like those movies, you might like the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, again, this is one of those that, like, I kind of want to revisit just because I remember seeing it as a kid and kind of liking it. And then I'm hoping that some of these movies I saw as a kid hold up better than like the live action Inspector Gadget movie, because I remember I loved that movie as a kid, but then when I watch clips of it as an adult, I'm like, God, I mean, I know I'm autistic, but like, how autistic was I as a kid? Like, that I actually thought this movie was actually good. Okay, so I guess what can we talk about next after Rocky and Bullwinkle and my?
Let's see. I think we've cleared most of the items on our list. I guess
Well, let's see.
we cleared most of the ones you wanted to talk about. A few of the ones I threw out. I guess do you want to talk about the Page Master?
Yeah, we can talk about Page Master. This is one of those movies that as a kid, I don't think I ever saw it, but I remember when I was a kid, one movie I watched like almost repeatedly was Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, which I had on VHS just to flex how old I am. But I remember, like, I never saw Page Master, but I remember on the tape they had like a trailer for the Page Master, and I remember seeing that all the time. And for whatever reason, I never actually watched it when I was a kid, or even to this day, I've never watched it. I've just seen clips of it.
Yeah, I only want to talk about this one briefly because I guess I threw this one out there because it does have live action and animation, but well, this one, I guess, I mentioned Rockadoodle. I guess I can talk about these two movies together because they're kind of doing the same thing, which is they both have live action at the beginning and at the end, but most of the movie's animated, so it's not quite as back and forth as something like Osmosis Jones is. It's
Yeah.
like the live action main kid gets turned into a cartoon at some point. He has to go on a cartoon adventure. I guess the Phantom Toll Booth is also in that category.
Yeah.
Just throw that one in there too, because I actually kind of like that movie better than Page Master. But
Yeah.
even though it's on the cheaper side, Phantom Toll Booth. But the movie has like it's just a kid goes on an adventure with some books. It's in this one, it's got like he gets three anthropomorphic book friends who are each themed after a different genre. So one is like fantasy, one is horror, and one is adventure.
Yeah.
And the first act is live action, and he's this kid who's like afraid of everything, and he lives his life by statistics, and he has to, I guess, learn. It's a confusing moral, because I guess it's about him learning to appreciate like books and reading more, but
Yeah.
I mean, he knows that he can rattle off all these statistics, so he's clearly been doing some form of reading.
Yeah.
But he goes to this library, goes on an adventure. Part of the issue with the movie is it's made to get kids into reading, but I don't think it does a great job of that. I don't think it really does a great job of making these books that it references, these various public domain 19th century novels, seem interesting.
I guess sort of like
it has. I mean, I would say The Adventures of Mark Twain. That's not a live action animation hybrid, but that movie does what the Page Master was trying to do better, even though it's just about a specific author.
Yeah, but I guess like, would you say it's kind of like how Fern Gully, I guess, tried to get kids more interested in the environment? And I mean, as far as I know, I don't think Fern Gully really took off like in a big way. It was just kind of one of those movies that sort of came and went in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a similar thing with Page Master. Yeah, it tried to get kids into reading, and I don't think it really. I don't know how much it succeeded, but because it wasn't a good enough movie
Yeah.
to make the stuff. But then you look at something like Rockadoodle, which is a similar thing where it's like live action kid at the beginning, then he gets turned into a cartoon by the cartoon villain, and then he has to go on an animated adventure. Rockadoodle is kind of a bad movie, but again, it's like Cool World, where it's like a guilty pleasure for me because it's so bizarre.
Yeah,
Or
and
kind of like James and the Giant Peach, also, where it's like takes place in this weird world of anthropomorphic. Like a lot of the rules of the universe are confusing because it's like you have a live action kid, and then his mom is reading him this storybook about how a rooster named Chanticleer crowed to bring up the sun, but then one day he got distracted by his enemy who didn't like him. Basically, he sent this guy to distract him, so he didn't crow, and the sun came up without him, and everybody turned against him. They're like, "Whoa, your crows were never bringing up the sun. You're a fraud, Chanticleer." But then the kid gets sucked into the book because he gets sucked into the story of the book because the villain of the book shows up in his room, and like I said, it is like another kind of fever dream type of movie, but I kind of enjoy it for that reason. And it does have really good animation by Don Bluth, even though the story is nonsensical.
Yeah, this is one of those 90s Don Bluth movies that kind of slipped by me because I remember when I was growing up, I did watch a fair amount of Don Bluth movies, even though I didn't know who Don Bluth was. Like I remember watching An American Tail, Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven. But I missed a lot of the 90s ones, except for like Pebble and the Penguin and Anastasia. And I feel like I might have seen like the VHS cover for Rockadoodle when I was a kid, and I was just like, what is this? And just never bothered.
Another thing about the movie, there's a narrator in the movie who constantly shows up to tell the audience things they can already see with their own eyes. And he interrupts songs. There are musical numbers in this movie that get interrupted by the narrator talking, and it's really bizarre as a creative decision.
Yeah, that is very odd.
I will say it's got a few. I will say if the movie has some songs in it, some of them are really terrible. There are a few that I think are decent if you're like into rockabilly. If you're into 50s rock and roll, you might like some, and like country music, you might like some of them. But a few of them are like there are a few songs that are really terrible. Like the operatic or attemptedly operatic songs they give to the owls are really bad. There are a few of those.
Yeah. Well,
the country and rock and roll songs are okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was reading online that apparently the voice of Chanticleer was done by Glenn Campbell, which that does make sense because he is a very prominent. I can't remember if he's like a country artist or a rock artist, but yeah, he is he did Southern Nights. That's right. So it does make sense, like, why some of the music would actually be good, because he has made some good stuff. But anyway, I'm just going back over my little list here, because I think we have covered just about everything. Oh yeah, there is this one last-minute addition that I threw in here, because we were talking about movies that integrate, like, you know, animation and live action, but more stop-motion animation. Alice, like, this is one that again I haven't seen. I've just seen clips of it. I remember I think it's Kyle Colgren, aka Owen Citizen, like years and years ago did a Browse Held High episode on Alice, and it was the first time I ever heard of it.
Well, I remember he did one on Little. I remember him doing one on Little, where he talked about Jan Svankmajer in general and how he should be considered one of the greatest animators of all time, but isn't talked about enough, which I actually agree with, because he was really a brilliant man.
Yeah, because from the clips I have seen of this movie, like, the stop motion, like, by today's standards, it is very crude, but it is still, like, impressive nonetheless. And even if it is like,
it's not as polished as like a Leica movie, but it's creative. It's clever. He does interesting things with it.
Yeah, like, I wouldn't say it's as smooth as like Ray Harryhausen or David Allen type stop motion, but it is, I don't know, like, it does kind of have that like jankiness of like typical like stop motion, but on a much more low budget kind of way. But I don't know, like at least from what I've seen, it looks like the consensus is just like, oh my god, this is like pure nightmare fuel. But I don't know, there's something about like movies that, whether intentional or not, are kind of nightmare fuel that I find like interesting in a weird way.
I love, not like I've said before, I love movies that kind of tap into like how scary everything is when you're a kid, that kind of show you scary things from a kid's perspective, which this movie kind of does. I could definitely see it scaring someone if they saw it as a kid, but I didn't see it until I was an adult. But yeah, this is, if you can tolerate like not a lot of dialogue in a movie, I will watching it at least once.
Yeah, because I don't mind movies where no one's really talking, just so long as the visuals are captivating enough. So this is one that has been on my radar for a little while. I might check it out at some point, but I kind of just wanted to throw this one in there because we were talking about it earlier as like another example of like animation crossed with live action. But I guess those are more or less all the movies that I had thrown up there. Unless you want to give some like honorable mentions that we didn't talk about.
Well, let's see. I gave a couple honorable mentions. I mentioned the Phantom Toll Booth, which only has live action at kind of the very beginning and very end. Honorable mention to, I guess, incredible. Some of the older ones I've just never gotten around to seeing, like Song of the South and The Incredible Mr. Limpet. I can't tell you exactly what I'd think of those.
Yeah. From what I've seen,
I guess.
Oh.
Honorable mentions to all those movies like Garfield or the Smurfs or whatever, where it's like, let's take an old cartoon character, make him CG, and have him interact with a real life human lead. Most of those are pretty bad. We talked about Rocky and Bullwinkle. I guess the Sonic movies that are out right now are kind of an example of this. You know, cartoon characters interacting with real people, and I am in a weird way kind of excited for the third one, even though I wasn't as excited for the first two.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I will say the first movie, like, I thought the first one was like way better than I would have expected. Like, especially when, because I know everybody's already made this point before, but like when the first trailers dropped and we had the ugly Sonic design, like, and then they changed it to the new one, like, and even then, like, the movie's still, I mean, it's not a masterpiece, but it's like way better than you would expect a Sonic the Hedgehog movie to be. But I'm
just looking forward to the third one because it's focusing on my boy Shadow, and it seems to be a loose Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation.
Yeah, I'm just excited for it because I'm hoping that it does better than that Mufasa prequel that nobody asked for.
Yeah, so I think, is that all you want to talk about?
I guess to kind of throw some more honorable mentions in there. One thing to kind of circle back to the Garfield movie I wanted to talk about is, and I know this one's also been brought up before, but I still love the story about how Bill Murray more or less got tricked into being in it because he saw that one of the writers he saw that somebody who was involved with the movie had the last name Cohen, and he thought, oh, sweet, that means the Coen brothers are working on this. But then he didn't realize it until later that their last name was spelled differently than like Joel and Ethan Cohen. So he more or less was like, ah, crap, now I gotta do this movie. And then he did the second one, I'm assuming out of contractual obligation. But it at least did lead to one of the best moments in Zombieland where he gets shot, and right before he dies, Abigail Breslin asks if he has any regrets, and he just goes, maybe Garfield. So there's that at least. But no, I guess to kind of close things out, what do you think it is about the whole idea of combining live action and animation that has made it so popular over the years?
Oh, geez. Let me think. If I have to say something deep, I guess it just sort of bridges the fantasy of, like, I think a lot of people when they're kids, they have fantasies about interacting with cartoon characters they like, and these movies sort of provide a visual basis for what that would look like. I mean, somebody like Chris Chan, who I mentioned earlier, definitely fantasizes about that sort of thing. And
yeah,
these kind of movies provide a sort of visual bridge for what that might look like that you can kind of tickles the imagination in that way.
Yeah, I can see that because I will admit, as a kid,
I forgot. Other honorable mention. I forgot. The SpongeBob movie, the first two at least. I've never seen the third one. First one is a movie I like a lot and have a lot of nostalgia for. Second one is not a terrible movie, but it's not as good. Third one I haven't seen.
yeah, I have to admit,
Those do combine the mediums though.
yeah, I will admit I haven't seen any of the SpongeBob movies. I remember when the first one came out, and I remember I played the video game for it. I never watched the movie, but I feel like since I played the game, I more or less know what happens in the movie. But that is one I have been kind of curious to check out because, like a lot of people from my generation, I did grow up watching SpongeBob, and I love that show. And from what I've seen in the movie, it looks actually pretty decent.
Yeah, it's a good movie. It's well paced. It is funny. A lot of it is dumb humor, but it's dumb humor executed well. So I think you'd like it.
Which, admittedly, that is what a lot of SpongeBob that I cannot talk. That is what a lot of SpongeBob's humor is. It is like dumb humor that's executed well.
Yeah. So I think we should sign off now. Maybe.
Yeah, I guess that would be a good time to do our little ending spiels. So yeah, Miss Mimi, thank you once again so much for coming on board. It was great having you.
I can't hear you. You clipped out.
Okay, sorry. I was just...
now I can hear you.
Okay, cool. No, I was just saying, thank you once again for coming on my silly little stream. It was great having you.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody.
Well, hang on. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
Oh, just go to my channel. It's under the name Mizz Mimi. Channel's called that, but you should be able to recognize me by my avatar.
Yeah, and I did leave a link to your channel in the. I'll leave a link to your channel in the description so people can find it. I
also recently did a stream with Dr. Storm. You can watch that if you want. We did a stream together on his channel.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend checking that stream out. Probably more entertaining than my streams. As for me, like, you know the drill. My social medias, the website. Let's see, video-wise, I did recently put out a new Full Moon Fridays video on transfers that I'm really happy about. I'm working on a video series for another series I did on my site called Trauma Tuesdays. And I might be getting a certain other VA involved for a promo. I'm not saying who it is as of right now. But yeah, that's something to look forward to. The most recent review I did was for Saw. There was a Patreon request. And let's see, Dr. Storm in the chat says, don't watch that stream. That Dr. Storm guy is awful. I mean, come on. Dr. Storm can't be any worse than FilmNerd. Like, ugh, FilmNerd's a real piece of shit. But yeah, that's pretty much where I can be found at. So I guess just to kind of wrap things up, let me turn up the music. But yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Look forward to more videos and more reviews very soon. And until then, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.
He's coming out, 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 he's coming out. It's there.